Sergeant and above or commander?
Lieutenant above. Yeah, it's like command stuff. And then for police chiefs, it's like.
Call to order, Town of Prescott Valley, October 3rd, study session. Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Freund. Councilmember Searcher.
Here.
Councilmember Greer.
Here.
Councilmember Dickinson. Councilmember Schumacher.
Present.
Vice Mayor Hunt.
Here.
Mayor Polguta.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, ma'am. First item up, Town Code, Urban Camping Restrictions, Public-Private Property. Chief, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Town Council. My name is Bob Tyser, Police Chief. Today is the study session on urban camping. And I'm not going to be doing the speaking on this. Lieutenant Roberts is going to be handling this. As you all know, we have two lieutenants that handle patrol operations. So they are the commanders that handle these type of calls, these types of incidences. And also Lieutenant Roberts will be handling the next study session just following this one. But I want to thank the town attorney on this because he did a lot of work on this with the research with other agencies and also writing the proposed draft language that's in front of you today. So I'm sure he'll be available to answer any questions specific to the lawyer part of this. So I'll turn it over to Lieutenant Roberts and she'll make the presentation. Thank you.
Welcome, ma'am.
All right, thank you for having us today so we can go over this and clarify a few things if there's any questions. So the first one is the urban camping. Ivan, I'm going to rely on you a little bit here, okay? I'm a cop for a reason, not a lawyer, so need your help. So on our town code updates, one of the important things for us to make sure that we were going in with our same visions that we're upholding. And this falls right along with one of our 2024 focus areas of enhancing the health of neighborhoods. This falls right along the line with that. We're not looking to go out and enforce these things strict and strong. I'll go over kind of what our focal points are here. So the town is authorized to have control over the property of their corporation. Urban camping has become an increasing issue, especially after the pandemic. We've seen a lot more people experiencing homelessness, which is a very unfortunate place for them to be in. The public places in Prescott Valley are provided as common areas for people to meet, relax, take part in their activities, and we want to make sure that they're able to do so. So in doing that, we can accomplish that through sound policy, enforcement efforts, education, cohesive community government relationships. I know the Supreme Court case that came up, I believe it was back in May, kind of sparked a lot of discussion about things. What it did for us is made us realize that our town code needed some updating. It wasn't that we needed to be stricter, we need to be less stringent. It was more like we need some clarifying language in this and we need to know where our enforcement efforts can be, where educational efforts are, but it was a pretty old policy. So we weren't quite up to where we needed to be with helping people in their situations and how we can address that. So what it did is it allowed us, that Supreme Court ruling kind of put the ball back in the court of the governments, and we were able to write those policies as we saw fit to meet our needs in the community, not necessarily a one-size-fits-all policy for everybody. So we appreciate that we're able to do that because what our needs are may not be what 2 cities or towns over are going to be. So what our recommended updates were, we gave legal a bunch of different stuff, probably with too much material. We wanted to go overboard with pretty much everything we had, and then Ivan made some sense of it and gave it back to us. So we definitely appreciate that. Our town code would be a class 1 misdemeanor, as are the majority of our town codes out there. What it would read is, without permission on any public or private property outside of a designated and permitted structure, it's unlawful for any person to set up a temporary living or sleeping environment, cook food or create or maintain a fire, and sleep in or upon any public building, alley, sidewalk, public way, designated trailhead, or any other public place or facility within the corporate limits of Prescott Valley. So we do have exemptions on that. Camping, cooking, fire activities that are approved through proper permits, town-sponsored events that allow these activities, and areas that are specifically designated for these activities. So as a police department, we, first and foremost, education of our community on various topics is our number one priority: safety, education, awareness of what people can and can't do, resources that they may not know are available out there for them. So that would be our first approach in this new addition to our code, is helping people get out of their unfortunate situations if they're willing to accept help, because quite honestly, some people aren't willing to, and that's their right as long as they're going to adhere to the code that we have. So our first step would be to educate them, request that they cease the behavior that's violating the town code, and then at that point, if they refuse to, we're going to have to take the next steps, either a citation, an arrest, removal of the property. But one recommendation we did have was signage on government property that's to notify patrons, hey, these are the new updates, no sleeping, no, we're not going to be sleeping in the public buildings or in the alleyways and doing different things. We recommend to businesses that they do the same thing. That does help us with our enforcement efforts as well, because that's already taken away that first step of notification. You already knew you weren't supposed to be here. There's a sign, so that does help us out. And it keeps them a little bit safer as well. Keeps people away that maybe shouldn't be there. That's it in a nutshell. It's not too much. Is there any questions that we can answer? Lori, did we answer all the questions that you had earlier today?
Vice Mayor, I believe you sent an email earlier.
I do. I have some questions, and thank you so much. So where I was here, sorry. So my question was, so we weren't, I understand we had increased complaints, not a lot, and that this is primarily driven by the Supreme Court, that we needed to come in compliance with that, correct? Was that the feeling?
Some of it was not necessarily in compliance. It was, we did have a policy in place, a code in place. It was very vague.
Okay.
It was, use the property for its intended use. That's leaving us open for a lot of liability and litigation potential of what does that mean to each individual person. So in order to take out that vagueness, as that Supreme Court case did come to light, it did kind of push us to say, hey, what are we doing in our policy? And that's when we realized, oh, we really need to expound upon this and make it a little cleaner. So
I understand the practice is now, and correct me if I'm wrong, that anybody that's experiencing homelessness needs to be out of the parks and the town-owned property by 10 p.m.
yes,
And if they have the permission of a private property, they could potentially stay overnight so long as they clean up and are out of there by a certain time, private property.
yeah, so like Walmart is known for that pretty much across the country. They allow like a 24-hour period of time that they'll allow people to park there, and then they have to move along and to another location. But yes, private locations are able to give that permission.
But this new ordinance isn't going to allow any of that, is it, on private property?
It still does allow that, but there's codes for living in your trailer or camp trailer, like on private property for an extended period of time, but there's still that 24-hour window where they can stay places.
What about if somebody doesn't have a car and doesn't have an RV, and currently they're just on private property with permission, with their sleeping bag rolled out, resting for the night, and then get up and leave the next morning? Because that's what's happening now.
That would be prohibited, you're right, but that's a zoning violation. So remember, any use of property needs to be consistent with the zoning, the commercial property, the residential property.
So that isn't allowed now. They've just been doing it. Is that what you're telling me?
This will make it more clear, and that's what they were describing.
And then I had a question about the notice. Were we going to give them plenty of notice to let them know that this was the new rule and all of that? Maybe
Yeah, just with, sorry, I didn't.
maybe communicate with some of our homeless advocates.
Not only that, we'd make sure we did a lot of social media outreach to let all of our citizens and community members know we're going to make these changes, just like we did with the speed limits, anything like that. It's really good practice to notify everyone in a reasonable amount of time.
I'm thinking more eyeball to eyeball with the people experiencing homelessness because a lot of them aren't on social media, I think. And then I had a concern about, and for some reason this says, which didn't make a lot of sense to me where it said, this section shall not apply to camping events sponsored and conducted by and under the direction and control of the town community services department.
Ivan, correct me if I'm wrong, that's kind of like what we do at the event center when we,
Let's see, am I back? I'm back.
That's Parks and Rec.
Right, that's Parks and Rec. And so making sure that if it's sponsored, like the example you had for, say, a
So I
scout
said
activity
Relay
or
for
something like
Life.
that.
because
Relay for
They
Life.
use our grounds and they sleep all night because it's a 24-hour event.
There you go. Right.
Right, so that would be allowed under this,
Yes.
even though they're not part of the community services.
It would be something that would be permitted by community services because it's a park. They
Okay.
would be doing it under our policy.
Okay, great. So that's part of the record. That's great. Thank you. And then, that's it for me. I'm just really concerned because there's no shelters now. I mean, there's one shelter in Prescott, CCJ, and they have, I think, 20 beds, 30 beds, 13 beds. And they're busy every night, and we have to take officers out of service to take them over there, and we don't want to. And I know that, I'm on the A Safe board now, A Safe Place board, which is our homeless advocate in Prescott Valley. And I know in between our van ministry and the drop-in center, we see anywhere between 6 and probably 15 a day, depending upon, who we run into. And I would say half of them don't have vehicles. And so they're using the Avaline to get place to place. They're carrying everything on their backs or on their bicycles. And those people don't have anywhere to go.
Mr. Mayor and Vice Mayor, if I could maybe just jump in a little bit on that. One of the real reasons why this came forward is that the Supreme Court was responding to a nationwide issue. And this is not just us, this is Arizona and nationwide. And nationwide, there's been real difficulty in figuring out what the proper balance is. And the Supreme Court was called upon to consider a Ninth Circuit decision that had said the Eighth Amendment was going to block any type of significant enforcement if they couldn't be shown that there were beds available right at that moment. And as you know, because of some of the difficulties of figuring these things out, homelessness and camps and those things just started spreading. Portland, Phoenix, it was just an amazingly difficult thing, and many communities had just stopped their enforcement. And then the businesses started coming in and saying, you better start enforcing. And the community said, we don't know, we're caught between a rock and a hard place. So when everyone got that opinion from the Supreme Court said, no, the Eighth Amendment doesn't apply. Now that doesn't mean you've got carte blanche, but at least you can start applying your codes again. And so when that came forward, then everyone said, okay, we can start, enforcing things again. We can stop having these bedrolls and camps everywhere. Now we've got to really start trying to figure out what we're going to do, how we're going to explain things to people, what we're going to tell them, what we're going to offer them. And if they don't accept that offer, then what we're going to tell them they can't do. And so this practice or process that we've gone through was to look at what everybody in Arizona is doing and trying to figure out who seems to have kind of found a good balance. And that was why we looked up here in northern Arizona and said, Sedona looks like they've found a fairly good, because that would be a place where people might be attracted. And yet they've got to find their balance. And so that's where we started. And I know that we don't have a solution. This isn't a solution. But at least it's a starting place. And hope
So-
that'll help.
Thank you, Ivan. And I'm familiar with the Supreme Court action, but, and I'm not advocating for homeless parks or camping. I'm not advocating for that at all. But I'm advocating for humanity and dignity. And our police department has always been known for that. And I know, Chief, you have a big heart for those experiencing homelessness. And so when I read this, I just had concern. And I guess before it goes to the town council, if I could please ask that you meet with some of our homeless advocates to go through this. So CCJ, A Safe Place, House of Hope, if you could meet with them and just sit down with them and then let us know how that goes in the staff report when you do it. But it's going to be hard, because, and I know we haven't had problems with camps, fortunately, like Prescott has, and with extra bedrolls and all that laying out. But with COVID and the price of housing, like you said, Lieutenant, it's gotten a lot worse. So I appreciate what you did. Thank you very much. I know that the police department does have a big heart, and I appreciate that.
Councilman?
I have a brief comment and question, I guess. Basically, I'm 100% behind this. The only concern I have, and I think Lori also stated it in a little different way, is that we have to have some humanistic approach. We're never going to solve the homeless problem entirely, I don't think, at least in our lives, because you have so many different aspects of it. You have people with severe mental health issues, you have alcoholics, you have drug addicts, but you also have people, let's say a battered woman who just had to leave her house at 11 o'clock at night to escape an abusive spouse. So we have to allow for those type of things.
And I will speak on the domestic violence. When we have incidents like that, we do have vouchers for hotel rooms and things for those specific types of situations that are set aside for domestic violence victims, those situations. And I think we've had the great success due to our relationship with our people experiencing homelessness, because we have been able to provide them resources, mental health. We have the East Ridge over there. They've been wonderful in accepting people who, yes, they may be homeless, but that may not be their main thing that's going on. Maybe they're not able to keep a job, hold a job down because they have mental health issues. So we get them into the facility and we get them regulated, and then they come back out and we may never see them again because we've helped them take that next step. So I do think we are doing an exceptional job with that human component of trying to help out our community that is falling on hard times.
And then another part of my issue, does this also include RVs? Because and other vehicles, like for instance, if somebody's parking in a van and living in a van that has no windows that you can see in to see if they're in there, you knock on the van and nobody answers, they're hiding. How do you enforce that? Or in the same thing with a motorhome, for example, they park a motorhome somewhere and they don't answer the door if you knock on the door. So how do you cope with those type of issues?
So normally our first approach is to try to make contact with them. We don't, unless it's a very extreme situation, we don't go to the next step of towing people's vehicles off the property. We give them a notice on there, give them a reasonable amount of time to come back, figure out what's going on. It also depends on where the vehicle is parked at. Is it causing a hazard? Is it on someone's private property where that's not even our concern at that point in time. But if they're living in it, it's obvious they're living in it. We're going to try 24 hours a day to try to contact those people, get them coming and going so we can let them know, hey, this isn't appropriate. But we do put stickers on their notification for them in an obvious place that they're going to have to see coming and going from the RV before we take any next steps on that.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor?
So, if we fine them $2,500, they barely have $1 in their pocket, which means then you're taking them to jail, and that's a really bad situation too. And that hasn't been our practice in the past. So the other thing I would like to offer up is that we look at the potential of some homeless shelters, a homeless shelter here somewhere. The pods are a great solution, and there's a lot of money available at the state. I mean, a town now that should have something like that. I'm thinking like even 8 beds would be great if we could do that. So, and you're right, we have great domestic violence. I mean, if you find somebody, you can put them somewhere easily at night, and had a beautiful event last night for that. So I think we should look at, last I knew, the state had $60 million for that, and I think it's something we need to look at.
Seeing no more comments, Lieutenant, you want to move on to item 2B?
So the next one is extremely straightforward, simplified. I'm just going to give you the abridged version of it, so we don't have to go through all the PowerPoints unless that's what you prefer. This is basically, people cannot ask for money panhandle in places that are going to obstruct the thoroughfare of traffic. So we all have our wonderful gentleman. He is the nicest guy in the world. The gentleman that stands over by Fry's in the median, and he's panhandling. Well, what that does is it congests traffic, causes a backup. So what we're trying to prevent is people, for one, I've seen him almost get hit by a vehicle numerous times when I've been going to the grocery store. So safety of our people out there, sometimes they don't recognize the danger of getting hit by a car in those areas. But the other priority is our traffic safety, and we're kind of clogging up the roadways sometimes. So this would prevent people from doing panhandling on sidewalks, medians, places where it's causing traffic congestion, just soliciting to vehicles. So this doesn't include your Girl Scout cookies out in front of Walmart, and they're allowing them to be there. That has nothing to do with that. This is strictly for motor vehicle panhandling.
Lieutenant, so that was very clear, very short. Awesome job. Are there any locations, because we pretty much, if you drive around, you kind of identified where the areas are, right? The corner by Wendy's, the gentleman that you're speaking about, over by Chase Bank and Windsong. Are there any spots that this does not apply to? Because over there in the Safeway parking lot, for the most part, they are in private property there, but it still affects traffic coming off of Windsong and exiting onto Windsong. Would this apply to them?
Are you talking about people on the sidewalk on Windsong, or they're in the parking lot?
North of the Chase Bank on Windsong, the entrance right there that empties onto Windsong. And it's usually not a sidewalk. He's usually kind of in the parking lot a few feet off of.
If they're panhandling to the vehicles driving down the roadway, Ivan, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that does still apply. If people are on private property but they're panhandling to people in vehicles, that's still going to apply to this?
It will still apply if they're panhandling to vehicles, yes.
Okay, so it's basically panhandling to vehicles. That covers it all.
Yeah.
Because there's also, up by Home Depot, there's one there as well. You often see.
And they can't panhandle in front of banks and places like that, directly in front of those areas either.
All right, they can't go direct to a vehicle. That is it. That covers it all.
Yep.
That's all I need to know. Anything else for the lieutenant?
So, but if they can do it in a parking lot still?
Only if it's permission of the property. So most of our big establishments, Safeway, all the ones over, all of Fane's property, all the ones over by Home Depot, they have already signed paperwork for us saying they don't want panhandling occurring in front of their buildings. So that's completely different. That's their private property, but this is just for the vehicles.
I support this because they too make me nervous when they're, when people are in the median. So my question to the chief was, what about when the firefighters do the fill the boot? They do that in the road.
Which road are they normally on that one?
Usually, I believe they do fill the boot like in front of Fry's
Right
or
in front of
something,
Fry's.
where they normally do it. I don't know.
Not on the road?
No,
Okay.
they're always in front of.
Like a
I've
Girl
never-
Scout booth.
Okay.
Yeah,
So they can do it in the shopping center
yeah, that's,
if they have permission?
yes.
Okay,
And for
perfect.
those kind of charity events, Girl Scouts, the Boy Scouts that come and do things, they have always allowed that.
And they usually handle foot traffic. They're not approaching vehicles.
Yeah, they're not running out trying to sell you stuff, candy bars and things in the parking lot.
Anything else for the lieutenant? Oh, yes, sir. Councilman.
I have a short question. Again, like I said with the last one, I basically agree with it. It's just in the implementation. There are a few real desperate cases out there where people truly need some help. And so would the responding officer question a person, try to find out, is this money going for drugs, or do they truly need, milk for their child or whatever, food for their family?
Absolutely. I've witnessed firsthand, I've done it myself. Somebody asking for money, a mom needing some food for their kids, whatever, I've bought them a meal. Our officers are human first, and they take it seriously and they take it to heart, the fact that there are people that need help out there. Not everyone's trying to get money for drugs, not everybody's trying to get money for alcohol. There are genuinely people that need resources and help.
Right.
So yes, that is absolutely our first stance.
All right, thank you.
Because there are organized groups that are going out, or were at one point going out, where you'd see someone like playing a violin, or they had a recording with a violin in the Sprouts parking lot. That was a big thing for a while, and hopefully this handles all those issues. Councilwoman, did you have something?
So I witnessed a situation where I was behind a vehicle and the woman felt compassion, the passenger felt compassion for the person panhandling, and they parked the car in front of me. They got out of the vehicle, went over, they apparently had extra meal in the car, and gave it to them, and then came back and we missed the light. So I'm wondering how you handle that type of situation.
So that's a twofold problem. One, in the roadway, you can't get out of your vehicle. But that's an educational conversation. Okay, for 2 reasons, you're blocking traffic. Now, when we enact this new code, we can address the person that's in the median asking, or in the roadside asking for something. But with the people in the vehicle, that's an educational conversation with them. Some people don't know, A, you can't get out of your vehicle. But 2, there's a safety component to that of getting hit by a car when you're getting out. You have good intentions. You want to help somebody, go park in a parking lot over here, call them over to you, give them the meal. There's a different way to handle that, and that may just be something that doesn't occur to them. So for me, I would recommend, and the same thing I would do for my officers is have an educational contact, not an enforcement contact on that one.
Councilman.
Lieutenant Roberts, would you recommend signage in medians or other problem areas of town that, say, per code, this is prohibited?
I think that would probably be a question for streets, because if you start putting too many signs up about things, then people are reading signs and rear-ending each other. So that's like a engineering study that's way above my intellect. So I would say that's probably a streets question.
Mr. Davison.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, so it doesn't sound like there's major changes. We will do some outreach. So we were planning to bring this to the next regular. We'll probably bump that to the end of October, the last meeting in October, or the first meeting in November as the first read. That way it'll give us enough time to do some of the community partner outreach and bring that back as part of the overall report.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Lieutenant. Moving on, final item, 2C, Town Code Coordination, Neighborhood Services, Development Services. Mr. Legler, are you taking this one?
Yes, Mr. Mayor and Council, gosh, it seems like it was just our last meeting. You were adopting a code amendment that allowed enforcement to go from our hearing officer process to the magistrate court. Okay, this is a companion amendment for chapters 6 and 9 to accomplish the same thing, essentially. What we are ultimately doing is making sure we've got everything in place for our 2 separate departments, neighborhood services and development services. And so in the past, everything in our code referenced essentially development services. And so now we're changing where we need to neighborhood services, or if we didn't say development services, but we said something like zoning, zoning coordinator or zoning administrator, we've now made it uniform for development services. And as you know, the new Neighborhood Services Department is going to be handling animal services going forward. And we've been very careful to make it clear that that is still within the police department, but under the direct supervision of neighborhood services. So that's being set out so that we can make sure that we are able to get all of the information that we need for those officers, but allow the direct supervision to be in neighborhood services. And as we've put this together, we've also looked for a couple of little things that we needed to tweak. One of the things we needed to do was to deal with abatement processes. There has to be an appeal if we say that we're going to abate something, but that appeal came to you in the past. And so we'd like to remove that so that that goes to a hearing officer instead. The other thing is that the animal services officers have sat down with us and said, hey, there are some things that we'd like to tweak in the code so that we can do that more effectively. One of the things was that they felt we needed some more direct ability to deal with circumstances where animals are being tethered in weather that is not appropriate. Apparently, there was a case where an animal was actually frozen to the steps, and they were having to deal with that circumstance. We're amending our definition of animal to make that a little more clear. And we're also making it so that you can have a first offense where a person or property, a person's been hurt or property's been damaged. In the past, that would normally have been, as a first offense, only a civil violation. There's the option of making that immediately a misdemeanor. And so that will help us with some of the enforcement we need. Do you have any other questions as you've looked through the changes?
Council, any further questions for Mr. Legler? Also seem pretty straightforward.
Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, thanks for coming out, everyone.